So you were kind of mentioning these, you have phase 2 and phase 3, right? And so these are the kind of the hurdles you have to go through, I guess, right? Doing clinical trials to show that this is an effective treatment, right, for PTSD. And perhaps we could go into what the symptoms of PTSD are and the kind of changes you might expect to see in a successful treatment with MDMA.
Okay. Well, with PTSD, there are the symptoms that people talk about in general, right? The ones that you would see in the DSM, that you have hypervigilance and nightmares and flashbacks and sometimes dissociation. And so you can read about those, but I think it's really important to understand how it affects people's lives. That if you are, what does hypervigilance mean in a person's life, right? So hypervigilance can look like that you never get a rest, that either you're always going to be thinking that there's danger around the corner, but also that there's danger within yourself, that you're dangerous, that whatever you do, there's going to be the next moment, whatever happens, you might say the wrong thing, you might do the wrong thing. And in retrospect, you did the wrong thing, you said the wrong thing. It's going to come and create chaos and disaster in your life, right? So then there's this pervasive kind of river running constantly of threat. There's a threat constantly happening. So if you can imagine that, right, that there's no rest from that, and that because of that, there's no room for curiosity, for present moment experience, for growth, for even understanding just a relationship with another human being, to really being curious about them, because the mind is so busy trying to keep these threats away that you miss the moment. You miss, maybe you have little flashbacks of those moments, but then they become, oh no, here's the fear, right? And I, if I can give you an example that I think is just a perfect example of somebody in our phase 2 study, she was experiencing this, she was talking about the feelings that she was feeling, the things that she was sensing. And she said, I'm really scared because this is something I've never had before and I don't know what's going on and I'm really scared. And we were trying to work with her to support her and to understand a little bit where that fear was coming from and what that fear was. And it looked very different than the fear of going into the trauma. And she kept trying to describe it, but couldn't have words for it. And then finally, she just started talking about it in a way that was like, there's something else going on here. And at the end, realizing that what she was actually feeling was peace, that it was so foreign to her and so scary that there was space in her brain, that she felt relaxed, that she could feel her body. That was just so foreign that it created this fear, until she realized, oh, this is what it is. And I've never felt it before.
And so the people you're dealing with, do they tend to be people who are suffering from PTSD as a result of a kind of acute trauma rather than chronic stress, like being in a war or sexual assault or car crash, these kinds of things?
Yeah, so in phase 2, it was for treatment-resistant PTSD. So people had to have had at least 6 months of treatment with either medicine and therapy, or medicine alone, or therapy alone, and that they failed in those treatments. And phase 3, it's not like that. We don't have treatment-resistant, but it is more complex PTSD. In general, the PTSD that can get some good results with other treatments can be more specific, like something happened like one time specifically. But when it's pervasive, it's very difficult, right? It's something that then becomes not only a trauma that happened and that affects you a lot and can be really harmful and damaging, but it becomes part of an identity. So there's an identity built up around it of, this is who I actually am. And there's this extraordinary part of us that is latent, that is like just not there, because the identity becomes the coping strategies and the trauma itself. And so those kinds, so then you're dealing with not just an event that happened, but a way of being. And how do you work with this way of being that makes it so difficult to do with existing treatments, and that we have found good results with MDMA.
Right. And you mentioned it works for treatment resistant PTSD as well, right? So that's something, we're not just talking about another treatment here. There's a bunch of things you could use. PTSD is something that is often seen as, until MDMA came along, I remember learning that it was effectively untreatable. And then we're seeing really strong results, right? I mean, it's been designated a breakthrough, we give breakthrough status,
yes.
right, as a treatment.
Yes. And with statistically significant results. And there's the data, right? There's numbers, and we need that, and we need the research. And then there's the stories, the stories of people that, does it work for everybody? No. Are there some people in the studies that have not gotten particularly great results? Yes. And they still suffer from PTSD? Yes. But also at the same time, people report having healing happen, even if they still meet criteria for PTSD. Significant reduction in some of their symptoms. A lot of times people do not return to psychiatric medications. And to be in the study, you have to then taper off your psychiatric medications if you're on them. And for some people, they have been on them for a long time. For some people, they have been on several, like 5 medications and 5, 7, sometimes even more medications. And so tapering off those medications is, one, very challenging, very difficult, but also it creates, it reminds them of who they are with a variety of feelings, right? Like instead of just a few feelings, it's more, wow, this is really challenging to be off them, but now I can do the treatment. And then sometimes, often after the treatment, they don't go back to those medications, or they go back with a they take a lot less.
Right. And I mean, because a lot of the time people are prescribed antidepressants, right, SSRIs for PTSD as a kind of numbing, to have a kind of numbing effect on the symptoms. And I think what you just raised is really maybe a crucial difference between that approach and MDMA, where you're very much, I guess, allowing the traumas to come out, allowing the symptoms to manifest, and then kind of confronting them and trying to kind of understand them.
Yes. So the treatment itself is the opposite of a lot of treatments that happen with in therapy, which is, I think, antidepressants can be very helpful for somebody. It can make the difference between not being able to function and being able to function. So there's definitely a value to them. And that keeping these feelings that being able to get up in the morning and being able to have a job and being able to do what you want to do is important. And this treatment is more addressing it, like really going into the feelings of the trauma, into the feelings of your the symptoms, what the symptoms have created, what your coping strategies, how your coping strategies have helped, but also how your coping strategies have kept you from the essence of who you are, because they have become who you are, and it's a sense of in a way a false identity. So our treatment is about then addressing what's there, what comes up in the moment, what's there in that present moment, how, what you're feeling, sadness, fear, anger, happiness, joy, whatever it is, being able to really stay with it and work through it so that you're going through it instead of away from it. And so we teach more around, is it possible to stay with it, to stay with these feelings that maybe up to this point, when you got to this particular door, this particular, if we use a metaphor of a door, that's when I stop. That's when the danger is. I do not want to open that door, so I back off. And that's when all my coping strategies come into play, when I get close to that door. And with MDMA is, how can we help you open that door? How can we support you and be here for you so you can open that door? And MDMA, it's a great support for that. It's a great support for that, because it really brings in those other aspects of the self that have been latent, that have been kept hidden. And so there's a lot of support. It's resource rich, right? It's lots of resources that come from inside, that then they feel, oh, I can totally open this door.
Right. It's probably worth diving into the effects of MDMA, so people have a sense of why it's so helpful, gives those resources you mentioned. So, I guess it's often today included under the kind of umbrella term psychedelic, even though traditionally, it has very different effects to something like LSD, right? And I think people have sometimes called it empathogen or entactogen, because the effects are less kind of visionary and more to do with kind of, I guess, feeling connected and loving and compassionate and all of these kinds of qualities of openness. Is that a fair way to describe the effects subjectively?
Yes. I think it. I like to say that it's about a journey of intimacy with the self. You become very intimate with yourself and with everything that is there. And that the way this is achieved, if we think about, so it releases oxytocin, a sense of bonding, a sense of being connected, and oneness with the world, or oneness with other people, with yourself especially, right? That there is then a connection to self that happens. And serotonin, which creates a sense of well-being as well. Prolactin, that is relaxing. So there's all these elements that come together to then say, if you have a sense of well-being and a sense of connection and a sense of relaxation, but you're not numb to your feelings, and your fear is lessened. So there is a sense of deactivation in part of the amygdala. So your fear is not quite as activated. So you have less fear, but you still have full range of feelings, more feelings than you're used to. And then you have these resources here of like, I can address the trauma while feeling this, while still feeling in my body, while still feeling connected, while still feeling a sense of well-being. So then it just creates this balance then of, it's not all trauma, it's not all challenge and suffering. Even if I'm suffering, even if it's really painful what I'm dealing with, I'm still connected to a sense of myself that I never had before, or didn't for a long time.
And you mentioned this, that it reduces amygdala activity, part of the brain that processes fear. And I feel like several years ago, I had therapeutic experiences with MDMA, and it felt very much like in everyday life, there's like a kind of firewall around certain traumatic memories that are kind of too hot to go near. But the MDMA just kind of just lowered those boundaries, so you can walk right up to the trauma and suddenly it's there and you're reliving it, but you're still bathed in what feels like very kind of positive mood, feels like very kind of loving feeling, but it can still be huge. The traumas can still be overwhelming, but you're not hijacked in a way where you kind of viscerally have to reflexively shut it down and say, no way am I facing that. Instead, you can turn towards it.
Yes, I mean, I think you say a really important word of being hijacked, right? One of the things that happens with PTSD is that we get hijacked when the trigger happens. So it can be hijacked, and then all of a sudden I'm back in another place at another time and in different age where everything is dangerous, even though I know that I'm here today, right? So the hijacking can happen.